Let me ask you something. If someone posted the entire secret history of humanity, buried in a random Reddit thread at 2 in the morning with no proof, no follow-up, no credentials, would you read it? Would you believe it? Or would you take a deep breath, lean forward, and let the story swallow you whole? Tonight, we're going deep into one of the strangest, most elaborate, most unsettling whistleblower posts I've ever seen online. It's a story about alien councils, human cousins on another world, undersea infrastructure older than our bones, Scalar weapons, crash retrievals, and a countdown to an arrival that no one asked for. The anonymous poster on Reddit calls themselves Rhea, and whether Rhea is a truth seeker, a truth teller, a brilliant storyteller, or something in between, their message is haunting. This is Beyond the Map. I'm Buddy Tidwell. Let's explore this together. So here's how tonight works. I'm going to read you the post exactly as it was written, or at least the parts that I can put on air. And as I go, I'll pause briefly to highlight things that stood out, patterns that we've seen before, and the implications behind the words. This isn't an endorsement. It's not confirmation. It's not disclosure. This is a vibe, a descent into one of the most unsettling modern mythologies circulating right now. So get comfortable, dim the lights, put on some headphones, and let's jump in. You wanted disclosure. I'm a whistleblower, recently retired from the inside, and you're only getting part of the truth. You can call me Rhea. It's not my real name, obviously, but it will do. I spent about 8 years in the military, and then another decade plus in part of the U.S. intelligence component that does not officially exist. On paper, I worked for a boring-sounding office in a department most people have never heard of. In reality, it was a compartment inside of a compartment where the odd stuff of a certain nature got routed. Okay, let's stop right there for a moment. This is classic whistleblower framing. Create credibility, establish a background, place yourself inside a world that no one can really verify. It's a powerful narrative move, and this is only the beginning. My actual specialty is electro-optics, lasers, sensors, EO imaging systems, the math and hardware behind how we detect things at distance, and in some cases, how we put energy on them. That's what I trained in, what I did most of my serious work on once I was off the deployment treadmill. So when I say I know something about directed energy weapons and weird sensor returns, that's not I heard it from a friend. That was my day job. Most of my career was boring, in the way dangerous jobs are boring. Long days in windowless rooms, Iraq and Afghanistan in the early years, doing the usual mix of SIGINT and HUMINT support. Phone records, patterns of life workups, building target packets on people who'd never know my name, but might notice a drone overhead later. After I got out of uniform, I slid over to contractor work and then got pulled into the permanent government side. For a long time, my world was very normal. Counterterrorism, sanctions evasion, shady cargo, going through weird ports, stuff like that. After that, foreign missile tests and what you've probably seen described publicly as space domain awareness. Basically, watching dots move around the sky and trying to decide whose dots they were and what they were doing. The weird part started when I was detailed to a small interagency working group looking at what was called anomalous aerospace and undersea systems. Translation: things detected and showing up on sensors that didn't match any known platform and didn't behave like clutter and did not go away when you changed radar modes or swapped optical systems. Now this is where Rhea starts pulling us down the ladder here a little bit. I was there because I understood both sides of the equation. The physics of the sensors and the intelligence context. You get taught very quickly to treat anything unexplained as a glitch, a calibration issue, operator error, software artifacts, anything that keeps your world tidy. You get used to hearing weird glitch all the time. Except after a while, you notice some of the glitches kept showing up across different systems, different countries, decades apart. Same behaviors, same basic locations, same signature that never quite fits. At some point, you either admit there's a real pattern or you drive yourself crazy trying not to see it. If you're useful and you start asking the wrong questions for long enough, someone eventually pulls you aside, takes you to a SCIF, takes your phone, and has you sign your life away, and shows you the next layer of the onion. The onion goes so deep, I doubt that even after years of briefing, I've been exposed to anything below a few layers. So, somebody finally sits Ray down and tells them what's really going on. If this is fiction, it's really good fiction. If not, then somebody had a very bad day in a very deep room. But back to the post. That's where I learned about most of what you're interested in here and what seems to be bubbling to the surface in the news lately. That's when I learned about what we call the Council. Yes, aliens. And I suspect you're not likely to see a lot of what I know mentioned, even by some who know it, who have begun speaking out for reasons I'll get into later. I've never met them face to face. Everything I know about them is from these briefings, documents, and one secure video session that honestly I wish I had skipped. But it lines up with too many independent data points to just shrug off as somebody's pet theory. The basic story is this. Earth was noticed roughly 2 billion years ago, long before anything walked around on land. Wow, 2 billion years ago. Not because we're special, but because we tripped a sensor, or rather life tripped their sensors. You see, the Council is not a single species. It's a collective of several advanced interstellar, maybe even interdimensional civilizations that run long-term surveys of stars and planets the way we run spy satellites. Huge distributed arrays of instruments working together, watching thousands of star systems at once, for millions of years at a time. Their gear probably makes the James Webb telescope look like a kid's backyard telescope. About 2 billion years ago, those instruments picked up biological signatures here, chemical fingerprints in the atmosphere that meant something was alive here. Atmospheric composition like free oxygen, methane, special fingerprints, chemical disequilibria that scream there's metabolism happening down there. You know, the basics. At that point, Earth went into a database as interesting, revisit later. Standard procedure for them when a world looks promising is pretty boring from their point of view. They send automated probes, not big, crude ships like you'd see in the sci-fi movies, just small, tough, very smart machines. Those probes come in, mostly target the oceans, and set up self-replicating facilities on the seafloor. Those facilities use local materials to build more facilities, more probes, craft that can operate underwater, in the air, in near space, and eventually avatars that can interact with whatever life evolves. These biological or rather biomechanical avatars are what some people who claim to have been abducted have likely experienced. Though they do have what we would call ASI, these beings are not gods. They are technology, and they aren't perfect. They make mistakes, glitch out, etc. The reason they base all of that underwater for a simple reason. The bottom of an ocean does not care about ice ages, political empires, climate swings, or wars. Temperatures and pressures change slowly over long periods of time. It's a fairly stable environment, and for much of human history has been mostly inaccessible. Speaking of time, we Earth humans tend to think in terms of nothing longer than the current human lifespan. When pondering non-human intelligence, we like to think in terms of deep space, distance, and light years, but we seldom consider the lifespan and concept of time for a post-biological species could be quite different than ours. Only our most astute thinkers in the realms of geology, paleontology, and cosmology think in terms of millions or billions of years. Geologic epochs, cosmological history, that's child's play for the Council, which has a different concept of time, more concerned with deep time, millions of years at a stretch. As such, their infrastructure is designed for that. So yes, a lot of the TMOs, transmedium objects, and impossible accelerations you've heard about are just their hardware doing its job. Wow. The plot is thickening here. Maintenance, observation, sampling, nothing heroic. The warp bubble Alcubierre effect was probably mastered by them before our solar system even existed. It's old tech for them, kind of like the wheel is for us. Also, we are not the center of anyone's universe. There's about 1 billion planets in our galaxy that are more or less like Earth. Some just have microbes. Some have more complex life. A smaller subset of these have or once had civilizations. We're just one more entry, a fairly recent one in cosmological terms, in a very large survey. Once early humans started doing interesting things, we moved from planet with life to planet with potential. At least we're seen as having some potential here in this story. They have watched the story unfold in slightly different ways, around 1,000 times from what I understand. Chemistry leads to biology, biology creates technology, tool use, language, agriculture, cities, industry, energy, space travel. Somewhere in there, you always hit the same fork. Either the species figures out how not to blow itself to pieces with the energy densities it increasingly has to access, to such as nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, antimatter, and the more exotic matter energy, or it wipes itself out. Our situation worried them. We are a little paradox, extremely good at cooperation, and also extremely good at organized violence. Our aggression stood out. Cooperation plus violence isn't unique, but we're very good at both. And once you get to things like nuclear power, that combo tends to end very badly. They'd seen plenty of variations of that play out over the last few billion years. This part is one of the most compelling pieces of the story. The undersea infrastructure, long-term monitoring by this council, and a non-human view of time. This lines up a lot with UFO lore. The transmedium craft, underwater hotspots, tic-tac encounters, and the decades of reports. Almost every line here, I'm hearing something that is in the current UFO topic right on the tip of people's tongue who are familiar with this topic. But back to the post. About 10,000 years ago, our trajectory toward that became clear, and there was a major argument inside the council about what, if anything, to do with us. One side said the odds favored self-destruction once we discovered and weaponized atomic-level technologies. The other side argued we were worth saving, or at least worth understanding better. The compromise was an experiment, one which has ramifications as to why all of this has been hidden for so long. And right here, folks, this gets deep. We are going straight into the rabbit. Roughly 65,000 humans were removed from Earth and relocated to what is basically a preserve on a planet around the star you know as 82 Eridani. Internally, we called those people Erids. That star is in our catalogs if you feel like looking it up, but the details of the target planet are not public for obvious reasons. Well, of course not. You wouldn't say the planet that is orbiting around that star because who knows who would go there, right? The Erids were started in kind of a controlled paradise. The world has large dispenser systems that can produce whatever basic material needs they have. Food, clothing, tools, building materials, entire structures for habitation. Think about Star Trek replicators scaled up and wired into the environment. In that setup, nobody starves, nobody's homeless, and nobody spends their life chasing money just to meet their needs. This was just the Erid's natural reality. The point from the council's view was to remove material scarcity from the equation and see what humans do and achieve when they're not spending most of their energy bashing each other over the head over resources. Meanwhile, the rest of us stayed here on the control planet dealing with that scarcity, ownership, money, hoarding, and the rise of socio-political systems based on scarcity. all of the things that define Earth's civilization. The result, according to what we were briefed, is that the Erids are now around 5,000 years ahead of us technologically. Same species, same basic biology, same starting point, completely different trajectory because of the conditions. Nature versus nurture on a cosmic scale. For most of their history, these Erids thought they were native to that world. They only found out the truth roughly a century ago in our time. They learned that they were uplifted, that their ancestors were taken from Earth, and that they have cousins here. Well, once they knew that, some of them started coming back to visit the original branch. This is where their history intersects with some of the UFO stories you know. The aliens that look almost exactly like humans are just that, human. They're not hybrids, not clones, not secretly angels or demons. They are Erids, born around another star, showing up here after being given a 10,000-year head start. They have in some cases met with leaders of certain countries and at least two UN Secretary Generals, both deceased. Wow. About 10,000 years ago, 65,000 humans were moved from the Earth and relocated to a world orbiting 82 Eridani. This is fabulous, fabulous story. They're 5,000 years ahead of us on average. And now they've eventually learned the truth. This Erids section is just cinematic. Post-scarcity humans, advanced cousins, returning quietly, indistinguishable from us. It's bold, it's elegant. In fact, it's almost too neat. But again, we're not here to believe or disbelieve. We're just here to feel the story. Back to Ray. Now we get to why this has been buried for 80-some years. You have to think like a senior U.S. official in the 1940s and 1950s. World War II has just ended, and the Cold War is starting. Everything is viewed through the capitalism versus communism lens. I think it should say lens, but I added that. Then someone puts a briefing in front of you that says, in essence, there is a group of humans living on another world who have no money, no private ownership in the way we structure it, automatic systems that meet their basic needs, and in that environment, they advance thousands of years faster than we have. Well, the men who built what we now call the Legacy program in the U.S., that sounded less like interesting anthropological data and more like a walking advertisement for space communism. It looked like proof that communism works better than the system that we're trying to defend. That and the ramifications of what could happen if that ever got out terrified them more than the existence of aliens did. Though, to be fair, they had their worldview rocked by the latter too. So the core of the cover-up has never been just aliens or even their technologies. It's been the systematic implications. The idea that scarcity and ownership are not hard-coded into reality, and that they are one possible way to run a society and maybe not the optimal one. That was seen as an existential political threat in the 1940s and 1950s, and some of the people who grew up in that mindset are still steering parts of the program today. Now add in the famous crash retrieval incidents, Roswell 47, Kecksburg in 65, a handful of other retrievals around the US and around the world. And what we were told is that most of these were not accidents. They were tests and gifts. The Council, with Erid input, allowed certain craft and systems to fall into human hands in a controlled way. Enough intact technology that a very motivated and capable society could learn from it. Not enough that it would instantly rewrite everything. In fact, the Kecksburg landing, it wasn't called a crash internally. It was a direct result of a meeting and a gift agreement that had been made at Holloman Air Force Base the year prior. The idea was to see who did what with it. Who could figure it out? Who kept it secret? Who tried to share? Who tried to weaponize it? Who panicked? Based on those results, the plan was to pick one primary human partner to act as the main interface for full council contact and to begin a managed process of reunifying Earth humans with the Erids and introducing us to a wider community. You can argue whether that's a good way to do it. I'm just telling you that this is the framework I saw laid out. In the 1980s and 90s, during a brief period when the Cold War ended, there was a push to finally disclose much of this. This was initially proposed at a meeting between U.S. President Ronald Reagan and then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at a summit in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986. Also discussed was getting rid of nuclear weapons as had been urged by the Council. In the end, it was decided to wait. There were 2 more U.S. pushes for disclosure between then and the 2017 New York Times article. One during the Clinton administration and another during the transition between the Obama and the first Trump presidency. Now, for the part that put a clock on all this stuff you've been hearing about, 2027, etc. Well, here it comes. This is the something is coming, something is imminently coming here. A hostile species, perhaps, who knows? Let's see. Back to the story. About 3 years ago, a species that is hostile to the Council found out about the Earth Project. I guess that's what we were called, the Earth Project. They're not part of the collective. They resent the way the Council handles the younger civilizations, as they themselves felt victimized by the Council. They also resent the credit the Council gets for successful cases. I've heard them described as the jealous neighbors who would rather break your toys than watch you win. Yes, we sometimes joke about stuff because, again, it's the only way to stay sane with this everyday knowledge and integrate it into your civilian life of Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas shopping, taking the kids to soccer, etc. The hostile group I mentioned decided to spoil the experiment. This species is ahead of us technologically, but far behind the Council. Though they also inhabit a relatively nearby star cosmologically speaking, their travel is slower, less elegant, and it has to take place in stages. Think of it as space island hopping, which is why the lead time is so long. You probably want to know what they look like. Physically, here it comes. Okay. Physically, based on the descriptions we saw, they're about 5 feet tall, segmented bodies, multiple limbs, basically ant-like in overall form. Nothing subtle or humanoid about them. They launched an expedition toward Earth with the stated goal of making a mess, cause chaos here, damage the experiment, and embarrass the Council by showing that they cannot protect their own projects due to internal disagreements. Basically, exploiting internal fissures, turning small cracks of understanding in the Council into canyons, thus destroying it. That's their hope, at least. The transit time means for us they are expected to arrive in roughly 2 years from now, the 2027 holiday present that no one asked for. Boom. There it is. That's the bomb dropping. I just think of Jeremy Corbell sitting on a stool and saying, "The lie is coming." No. You'll have to be the judge of that. Now, back to the story. That news triggered a major debate within the Council. One group said, "The rules say non-interference. We watch and record what happens, even if it gets ugly, as we had done in the past." The other group said, "Well, we effectively created this situation by tagging and monitoring this world. We have a moral obligation not to just watch a civilization we've been studying get smashed by somebody else's grudge." If the Council showed up in force, it wouldn't be much of a fight. Their technology relative to the ant species is like a modern carrier group versus a skilled archers on sailboats. The whole thing would be over quickly, and it would also completely blow the point of letting a young species find its own way. It would also be a tremendous blow to the human ego, which the Council is well aware of. So they arrived at a compromise. No direct Council fleets defending Earth. No obvious interventions. Instead, they would quietly arm us. What they chose to give us are things they roughly call Scalar phase weapons. Our vocabulary is not great here. They're not just high-powered laser beams. They interact with fields we do not fully understand or really have names for yet. Shift phases dump huge amounts of energies from the vacuum into the very volumes of space-time without a conventional bright beam or explosion. Compared to our current directed energy weapons, they're an enormous leap. As someone who spent years working with lasers and optic systems, I can tell you they sit so far off our current tech tree that if you saw the damage assessments from a pulse without context, you would think they were misprints. But compared to council weapons, they're Nerf guns, training wheels per se. That decision set off another big argument, both among them and among us. The obvious concern was simple. Once the external threat's gone, what stops us from turning these things on each other in the same way we took nuclear power and turned it into thousands of warheads aimed at our own cities? On the U.S. side, there were people saying exactly that, and some members of the council argued that if we on Earth roll out Scalar systems across arsenals, the first real test after the bugs are gone will likely be some crisis where two human governments start lighting each other up with technology they don't fully understand. The counterargument, which won, was that species-level survival has to come first. If humanity gets wiped out by someone else's petty feud, then the entire debate is academic. Also, if humans fight this off themselves instead of watching the council show up and save the day, they'll meet the wider community as people who actually did something, not as rescued primitives, human ego intact, and kill switches, if you will, have been built in to the tech to disable it after the conflict, which the council sees us winning. If we then decide to use these weapons against each other, they'll simply be disabled until we, humans, have learned enough to disable the kill switches, which could be thousands of years from now, for all I know. So against a lot of internal resistance, the council has been quietly providing Scalar phase systems to several blocks, not just the U.S. The list I saw included the United States, China, the European Union through specific channels, Russia, and Brazil. Those systems are being integrated into space platforms, aircraft, and undersea assets. Testing is happening in remote places and high altitudes, often disguised as other things. Most of the people physically working on it think it's an advanced homegrown black program. Only a very small circle in each capital sees the full context. I got to see these pieces of that picture shortly before I was pushed into retirement, which is a polite way of saying I stopped being convenient. Well, it's getting deep here, isn't it? That is as specific as I'm willing to get. There is one more reason I'm writing this now, after pondering it for a long time. And it is more personal than the 2-year clock. A friend of mine, someone I worked closely with inside the program, another EO specialist, had been talking quietly years ago about going to Congress. Not with everything. They were not suicidal. Just enough to force a real closed-door hearing in the Senate. Get the true nature of certain special access programs acknowledged on paper, making it harder to bury the whole subject under jokes and career threats. Over a year ago, I got word that they died. The official explanation has been vague and unsatisfying. Medical complications on a trip to a black site in the Indian Ocean. Those medical complications do not match what I know about their health. Then it became an accident at home, with no details anyone will put in writing. People who would normally be candid went very quiet, very fast. Maybe it's just bad luck. People do die suddenly. But given the threats which are known about within certain intelligence community sectors when one is associated with this subject, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that the last long conversation I had with them was about whether it was worth trying to talk to certain congressional staffers for a certain senator. After hearing recent news confirming publicity, much of what I know to be true privately, I stopped telling myself I would wait and see how things played out. Life is short. So here we are. Some stranger on the internet telling you an unbelievable story you're free not to believe. With roughly 2 years on the clock and the current rate of leaks and whistleblowers and half disclosures, it's very unlikely they keep all of this under wraps until the first time something openly not from here appears in our sky or in our orbit. At some point before this happens, at least one major government, maybe more, is going to go public in a controlled way. My guess would be China or the US, but it could be one of the others on that Scalar weapons list. You'll likely get a very carefully worded announcement about unidentified aerial phenomena about contact with non-human intelligences, and about new defensive technologies and unprecedented international cooperation. It will be designed to manage panic and control the story. What you probably will not hear in the first round of briefings is the part about the Erids, the economic implications of their society's existence, the billion other habitable planets, the undersea infrastructure that's been there longer than we've had our bones. You will not see anyone step up to a podium and say, oh, by the way, there's a branch of humanity that grew up without the idea of money and scarcity 10,000 years ago and advanced 5 millennia past us. That's why I'm dumping this here, where people can ignore it, laugh at it, or save it and see how it ages. Like I said, do not have to believe me. Like I said, you do not have to believe me. I'm not here to sell a book, go on a podcast, be on TV, or do UFO lectures. Treat this as fiction if that makes you more comfortable. What I'm really trying to do is get you to think past the kiddie pool questions. Are UFOs real? Are NHI good or evil? It's not the interesting part. The far more interesting question is, what happens to this planet once everyone knows we're being watched, that we have cousins around another star, and that some of the basic assumptions we built our societies around were just one option, not a fundamental law of nature. In a year or two, you start hearing officials talk about our cousins among the stars, or civilizations far older than ours, and new non-kinetic weapon systems, and shared planetary defense. Remember this post and see how well it fits. Look, the bugs are coming either way. Council's not going to save us directly. They already handed out the tools, and they're watching to see what we do with them. The part that is still up to us is what kind of world we build if we get through it. Will we all go back to work and beat each other over the head with really advanced sticks? Or do we achieve a more enlightened potential? That is all I have. It's signed Ray. So, what do we make of this? Is it a cosmic warning? Is it a manifesto? Is it a creative masterpiece? I think it probably is at least that. Is it a myth for disclosure era here that we're in? Stories like this show up when a culture is anxious, when people sense change is coming, or when the sky feels crowded and the water feels deeper than we thought. Whether Ray is telling the truth or expressing the truth that isn't literal, the post is a mirror reflecting our fears, our hopes, our suspicion that something big is coming, even if we can't name it. Sometimes a story doesn't ask to be believed, it asks to be considered. And maybe that's enough. This is Beyond the Map. I'm Buddy T. Stay curious, stay grounded, and I'll see you with the next strange story.